Hi, thanks everybody for coming. My name is Liza Mundy. I am the only non-PhD on this panel. Everybody else is a doctor, but that's okay with me. I'm really pleased and proud to be with you. And as you know, the topic of today's discussion is going to be strategies to accelerate women in tech in classrooms, school districts, startups, senior management, and in boardrooms. I'm honored and pleased to be up here with a panel of incredible experts on this topic. We have Ann Kirschner, who is a university professor at the University of New York and president of Comma International. And during the course of our conversation, if you want to talk about what that is, please do. We have Dr. Gilda Barabino, who is a dean at the Grove School of Engineering at the City College of New York. We have Judy Spitz, who is a former CIO of Verizon and a founding program director of Women in Tech and Entrepreneurship in New York at Cornell Tech. And Dr. Kimberly Scott, who goes by Kim, I think, and she's associate professor and founder executive director at the Center for Gender Equity in Science and Technology at Arizona State University. So thank you so much for coming today. It's great to be up here. I am, for the most part, a journalist and a book author. I'm actually just about finished with a book on early women in STEM, of women who worked as code breakers during World War II. Spent a lot of time in assisted living facilities, talking to really interesting women in their mid-90s who did really, really important work over a half century ago. And got into this subject a little bit working on a piece for The Atlantic on that my editors titled, "Why is Silicon Valley So Awful to Women?" I learned after the fact that they actually were arguing about whether it should be "Why is Silicon Valley so awful to women?" or "Why is Silicon Valley still so awful to women?" And they decided to lose the still, but the point being that it hasn't changed a lot in the past several decades, and the question is why. And this, for me as a journalist, was a new field. I'm from Washington, and I had written a lot about women in politics, women in the US Senate, women in law, women in journalism. I understood a little bit about why women still have a hard time in spaces like the US Senate that have been historically exclusionary to women, spaces that were built for men, venues like politics, for decades, obviously, women couldn't vote historically in this country. So there were barriers, historical barriers, that women had to overcome in order to be admitted to spaces like the US Senate. And Silicon Valley, it seemed to me, was very different. I mean, this is a young field. This is a field that grew up after the Second World War. As we were talking about in the cab, women were the early software programmers after the war. And so why is it that a relatively young industry, a progressive industry, that imagines itself as the place that's going to solve all the world's problems and everybody's right thinking, why is it still so hard for women to feel comfortable in the tech field, and both in terms of the actual workspace and in terms of academic environment? So that's what we're going to try to engage with today. So Judy, I thought maybe I could start with you to talk about, sort of set the stage. What is it like? How bad is it? And what is the history here?
Yeah, so I think the history is important because it's, in a sense, not why is it still so bad, but how did it go, at least from a computer science perspective, to be having been better so many years ago to where it is.
It's gotten worse.
And so if there's anybody in the audience who doesn't know these often quoted statistics, they're still important, which is that back in 1985, the percentage of the graduating classes in computer science and undergraduate school that were women was 35%, and today it's between 17 and 18%. So in the last 25 or 30 years, which happens to have been when I started to work at Verizon to when I left, the numbers went down like this.
Don't take it personally.
Yeah, I know. There's this, there are a lot of charts and graphs that show this, but the one that I like in particular just charts that that downfall compared to women going into the medical sciences, women going into law, women going into life sciences and so on, all of which have been on an upward trajectory. So why computer science has taken this nosedive, all at a time when, of course, technology has been exploding. The job growth has been phenomenal. The number of fields that are being disrupted or taken over by technology, we all know this.
The salaries are very good.
That's where the money is. So the fact that women went from a 35%, you know, not fantastic, but not terrible, down to where it is now is what is so remarkable. And it's been resistant to change in the last 5 to 10 years when people have started to pay attention to it and so forth. So that's kind of the history. The other point I just want to make, again, so that we're all level set here, is it often gets lumped into the discussion about STEM. So I have a little bit of a soapbox about that, because the T in the STEM is uniquely different. It's closest to engineering. But in the sciences, where there's been a lot of push to get girls more interested in science and so forth, those numbers have been going up. In fact, in undergraduate schools in biology and chemistry and physics and so on, there's 50% or more women. Even in math, the numbers have been increasing. I've seen some numbers recently that suggest we're close to 50% female in math as well. Engineering's not great, but it's been climbing at least a little. It's only in computer science where the numbers have tanked, and at the same time as that's where all the job growth is, and at the same time as the percentage of women in undergraduate school is at its peak. So there's this perfect storm.
Let's stay with this history for just a minute. I'd be interested to hear what the other panelists, because this was something I really tried to understand when I was reporting my piece. Why has there been this decline? At the same time that historically exclusionary fields like law, say, I mean, there was a time when there was a very, small availability of spots in law schools for women. So historically exclusionary fields have seen an upsurge in women, but computer science hasn't. I've heard explanations being that early computers were marketed to boys in the 1980s and 1990s, and so girls got to college and they felt like they were already behind in very competitive and intimidating environments, so they would switch to easier majors like electrical engineering. I'm an English major, so that's sort of hilarious to me. But what do other panelists see as explanations for why the numbers in computer science have gone down? Do you, Gilda, do you have thoughts of being?
Well, I'm going to broaden it out a bit to not just be about computer science, and I'm going to give an example from engineering. So in engineering, we have a number of disciplines that are historical in terms of how long they've been around. And biomedical engineering, for example, is a newer discipline. Yet, as a newer discipline, what we're finding is at the undergraduate level, we're starting to reach parity for women. But as you ascend the academic ladder, you don't see that parity at all. And in fact, those numbers start to go down. And that's why I wanted to broaden the conversation a little bit, because there's something that's going on that's deeper as to why, so we can't even explain it away with this historical exclusion, as to why, as we go up, women are not being represented. And I have a theory that some of that is related to the environments that we're working in. So we put it all on the women. And so I'm back to biomedical engineering, for example. What is said is that it will draw, as a field, as a discipline, it's going to draw more women and more underrepresented minorities because it's a field that has societal impact. And women and minorities tend to identify with fields like that and want to enter that for a career for that type of impact. Yet, what is it about our fields and our profession and the environments where we're training women that's pushing people back out? So there's something about our environments that are not inclusive, that are squelching, extinguishing that flame of interest in our fields. And so that's something that I think we're going to have to pay more attention to. What are we doing about the environments that we're training and preparing people in?
So even when parity is reached in undergraduate departments, it's still there's still a drop off after that.
Exactly.
Yeah. And did you have something?
You could take any part of the pipeline and talk about some of the issues, you know, whether it's boys playing video games that are primarily violent and don't seem to draw young women. But if you take a snapshot of an entering college student and you look at what happens in computer science classes, all too often, and Judy gave you the stats before, a young woman will walk into a computer science class and she'll be the only one in the room. Or maybe there'll be one or two others. Well, it already doesn't feel like a very warm environment, right? Like, how come there's nobody there who looks like me? And when you add on that all of the perceived values we're getting from the tech culture, you know, whether it's the things we read about, sexual harassment of women in Silicon Valley, or the sort of, you know, pocket protector nerd culture that we think about, or the fact that you're mostly women out there today, you know, hearing we're talking to ourselves, right? So all of these things become one more barrier for women to encounter. And then for first-generation college students, there's a particular issue because they know what a doctor is. They know what a lawyer is. They know what the Senate looks like. These are all things that you can see on TV or whatever. What's a software developer look like? When you go home and you tell your parents, you know, who might be immigrants or you know, not having gone to college themselves, that you're going to major in computer science, there's something very abstract about it that, you know, may be sort of a cultural barrier as well. So you add that all up, and we're at the place we're at, which is struggling to get to explain to women how important this major can be in transforming their lives, whether or not it's their major, but the whole idea that computational thinking, whether they are going to be any of those other fields, teachers, et cetera, is essential to how they're going to view their professional success going forward.
The other thing is there are two stereotypes about if you don't know what software development is and you just go by what the stereotypes are. The two most prominent ones, which couldn't be more wrong, are number one, it's a loner sport. Mm-hmm. It's for people who like to be alone in their basements and hack code. Having spent 30 years in the technology field, you couldn't be farther from the truth. Nobody works on a software project by themselves. Right. And the two is that you're working all hours of the day and night and there's no work-life balance. Again, couldn't be more wrong. I can't think of another profession where it isn't easier to work from home because all you need is your computer. So you get a lot of sort of stereotyped negative bias in addition to the lack of familiarity and all the other things. And they all sort of add to you have to really want it. You know, you have to be willing to fight the hard fight. And I think one of the things that we all are trying to figure out how to do is how to lower the impedance. So all you have to do is have a passing interest to walk into that first class and get turned on.
So it felt to me when I was starting my reporting that there are actually a lot now of organizations, maybe just seems that way, girls who code, women who code, et cetera, that there is a big push out there to encourage young women to consider this as a viable and terrific career option. Kim, what is your experience at the Center for Gender Equity at ASU? Is that an illusion on my part that there really are an increasing number of organizations pushing girls into this field, or what are you seeing sort of coming in, and what approaches are you all taking to promote gender equity?
Sure, and I agree with you. I think there's been an incredible number of initiatives, particularly when we think about when President Obama announced the Computer Science for All initiative, and then $135 million or so was funneled into one federal agency or a couple to attempt to support underrepresented groups to get into computer science. And so then we saw this flurry of activities that the work that we do in the center is questioning and also linking theory to practice to say, what should we be doing? To the point that was said earlier, a lot of the initiatives and a lot of the well-meaning efforts are culturally irrelevant. We know unequivocally that for women, for girls, and particularly underrepresented women, I'm going to be specific, African American, Native American, Latina, and Asian American women, that if we are put into a project-based situation in which we understand and see the impact of our work, on our communities, we're more likely to persist, even in the face of terrible stereotypes and biases. And so I'm mindful and hesitant about this, this push of the initiatives as we're gauging their success merely based on how many girls or boys or underrepresented students we're touching. Success for us at the center is not how many you touch, but what those individuals do with that knowledge, do with those competencies, do with the computational thinking to benefit their communities and the communities of others.
I have Dan Rosenzweig's previous slides in my head, which is about the importance of numbers, that numbers do matter in this area. If you think about American competitiveness and the incredible number of high-paying jobs and important work to be done for the next generation of innovation in the United States, I couldn't agree more. It's the impact on individuals, but we've also got to move the needle for the country as a whole, and that requires the accretion of all these groups coming together, plus all the work we're doing on college campuses and with boot camps and all the work you are doing out there to partner with universities. It's got to be this enormous wave of emphasis to be able to really fill the need, which is so enormous.
So is there controversy around the sort of question of what is the most important stage, educational stage, to get young women to go into STEM fields? I mean, is there thinking that the university, that waiting until college is too late?
Some people say that, you know, that college is too late, you need to go further downstream. It needs to be in high school. Nope, that's too late, you need to be into the grade schools.
Right,
nope, that's
right.
too late, you need to start, you know. I've got a 3-year-old grandson. You know, should I be nervous? He's not coding already.
Right.
I mean, you could take this all the way down. And the fact of the matter is, you need it at all levels. And even if you've had it at the younger levels, you need it at the more advanced levels. You know, I had somebody say to me, well, if my child already took computer science in high school, what do they need to take it for in college? To which I said, did they read Shakespeare in high school? They probably need to read Shakespeare in college as well. So the idea of advancement, I think, is really important. But I do think that we're beginning to see colleges and universities pay attention to the fact that they need to bring coding and generally computational thinking into the change in the disciplines over time. So I think you're beginning to see inroads made at all levels.
Well, I like to speak to that controversy and to add on to what Ann is saying. Like, why are we even looking at it like, oh, wait, now it's too late? Like, why are we even getting to the point where we're not addressing the fact that we are pushing people out from the very early stages? Women, underrepresented minorities, people in general are naturally inquisitive. People are naturally inclined towards these fields. So what are we doing to push that natural inclination away? That's part of it. It's absolutely true that you need activities all along the way, because what's the point of if you use the pipeline metaphor, what's the point of priming the pump just to push them out for a leaky pump later? So that's one piece of it. Another piece of it is we need both representational diversity and interactional diversity. So it's true that you do need to get the numbers up, but simply getting numbers up is not going to fix the entire problem. So we need that quality of interactions with people once they're in this. People want to feel like they belong. And as you were writing, Liza, in your article, it's like, how do we remove impediments? First identify them, and then how do we remove them? Because everyone wants to feel like they belong in the community and that their expertise is valued. So there is no silver bullet, there is no magic wand to wave. We have to have an all-fronts approach at all times. Dealing with the individual, dealing with the institutions, dealing with the environments and the organizations, all of that is going to be needed collectively.
So, you know, another perspective on that is getting back to, you know, is it too late in college and the whole metrics game? You know, we all go to college to learn basic life skills. We all take English composition, even though the vast majority of us are not going to be journalists. These are things we need to know. And I would certainly argue, and there are lots of other people who argue the same thing, that having a basic understanding of how software gets written is basic literacy at this point. Even if you never are going to write a line of code in your life, you're going to be working in a field where you're going to be talking with, dealing with people who are writing code. So you have to have some understanding of it. And so if we just took the step of making an introduction to computer science course, and one that emphasized computer science as a tool for solving the problems that you're really passionate about so that you can engage people. If you just did that, a certain percentage of students who take a well-done course, underrepresented, female, male, are going to get interested because it's just the law of large numbers. And if you look at the numbers and the problem we have with the gender gap and basically the workforce gap, you know, we're focused on gender and underrepresented groups, but from a core practical perspective, we're graduating about 50% of the needed workforce in tech for the jobs that are available now and in the next 10 years. So if you don't care what color, size, shape, or gender, we just don't have enough bodies. So if you look at the national statistics, if you could get the number of women who choose computer science as their major from the 1% of all the women who go to college today to something like 4 or 5%, which is roughly on par with the number of men, you would double the number of technology workers in the country. Problem solved from a workforce perspective. So that's you know, sort of magical, but that basic fact that in order to work in any field today, you will have a leg up on everyone else if you have some understanding about the software that drives your field is something that I think universities around the country should get behind.
Yeah. Yeah, I have to say, purely anecdotally, as someone I have 2 kids who are in college now, and watching them go through our local public school system, you know, they were really never offered in their a course in any kind of coding, and I, you know, as a liberal arts sort of family, like I couldn't offer them that, and I was surprised that it had not become more embedded into, because what you're saying is just instead of girls who code, et cetera, just put it in there so that everybody gets it, at least a basic course, and gets a taste of it. So what are the strategies that are emerging in terms of getting more diversity into STEM fields and into computer science in particular? And I would just throw out, I talked to, several years ago, I interviewed Maria Clave at Harvey Mudd College, which has done a very good job of getting, I think, pretty close to parity in its student body, women computer science majors. And funnily enough, I was interviewing her for a piece that had nothing to do with computer science. It was on failure. And it was on sort of coming to terms with failure and learning to accept failure and move beyond failure. And she was really quite wonderful in talking about her own failures and how she accepted them and moved beyond. But she talked about creating a climate at Harvey Mudd where everybody understood that they were going to fail, and they were taught to create strategies. So you know your first year is going to be really hard, so you learn to reach out and sort of build a network of people who are going to help you through and help you with problems, but really sort of putting it out there at the very beginning that you have to accept the fact that failure is going to be part of progressing and moving forward. And of course, they've made other curriculum changes. You know, she talked about some of their core classes and really changing them in a way that she thought would be more conducive to women students. But I thought that just creating a culture where it's understood that failure is going to happen and that you need to put structures and strategies in place to get you through that, I just thought that was a very interesting strategy. Mm-hmm. And I wonder sort of what other strategies you all see bubbling up to, you know, to combat the decline.
Some of the things that we've noticed is looking at historically black colleges and universities, as well as tribal colleges, both of which have an incredible relative number of graduates who are going into the STEM fields. Now, I want to pause for a moment and just talk a little bit about the Native American populations. not only because I'm in the Southwest, but because I think this is a social justice issue that we oftentimes mask when we talk about gender or underrepresentation. To the point that you said earlier in terms of the statistics, oftentimes federal agencies can't even get statistics for Native American populations in computer science because the numbers are so low. So I just want to start there with that reality if we're going to talk about addressing issues of equity and parity. Be that as it may, what is working with HBCUs, historically black colleges and universities, and tribal colleges are mentors, and not automatically mentors who resemble or belong to the same race or ethnic or gender categories as their students, but mentors who are incredibly giving of their time, who identify some of the issues and the hostilities, but also how to overcome them, and that it's not simply something that you stop and say, okay, well, then that's the end of it. For us in CompuGirls, which is a program that has been funded, that I founded over 10 years ago, a quick anecdote, we had some phenomenal young women. They could code anything. They not only knew how to code, but they knew how to teach others to code. They had their parents on board. These were first-generation young women who went on to college. And so after about 10 years, I would do my longitudinal study, and I would say, do you want to go into STEM? And inevitably, more likely or not, they said, oh, God, no. And I said, oh my gosh, we failed. What did I do wrong? So I had a follow-up question. I said, why? And they said, oh, well, I want to be a neuroscientist. I said, well, that's sort of STEM. And they corrected me and said, no, no, I don't want to go into your STEM. Because for them, it was so hostile. It was so inhospitable and intolerable. They were more willing to say, I want to take the skills that I've learned, which are not only the technical, but also the power, what I call power skills, and create my own pathway. I don't particularly like the metaphor of pipeline, but pathway, so that that pathway can be more just.
Where had they encountered the hostility? I mean, in classes or in internships? Had they been yet, you know, into the workforce? Like, was it their classmates?
Yes. All of it.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, yes. I mean, if we look at some of the social science literature that has done, I think, a really good job of documenting what's happening downstream, meaning in middle schools or really even elementary schools, the feeling of belongingness or lack thereof, implicit ways of being pushed out of classes or being in a class and being one of the few women or women of color or girls, and the teacher not calling on you as much, or not even giving you enough wait time in order to answer the question.
Right.
That starts as early as kindergarten. And unfortunately, the girls know about it. And then it carries through, as we see, not only into post-secondary, but as was just reported in the Tech Leavers report that came out last week, it goes all the way through to, as Judy said, some of the most lucrative environments which are in the tech fields.
So I'd be really depressed if it weren't for the fact that Judy and I have been working for the last year on an initiative between Cornell Tech, her institution, and CUNY, my institution. The initiative is called Women in Tech and Entrepreneurship in New York, known affectionately as WiTNY. Maria Klawe is, in fact, the high priestess of diversity in computer science education, and we've learned a lot from her. And Judy, we can share the joy of sort of talking about this program, but I would pull out two things, just building on what Kim just said. The first is the incredible importance of community, especially in a commuter school where students are coming in, taking their classes, and then leaving. How do you build community around that? And so we've had to be very thoughtful about how we gather these young women together so that they have that sense of community. And the second thing is we are uniquely blessed to be in not only a city of extraordinary diversity, but in a university of extraordinary diversity. And so taking advantage of the diversity of our university and melding it with the New York Silicon Alley community to be able to say, not only is New York a powerhouse in tech, because it is, but New York is a powerhouse of diversified tech, and working with the companies to create the kind of environment so that if we are able to move students along the pathway, when they eventually get into the workplace, they're entering places that are already warm and welcoming. But you know, it's something that requires work at every step of the way.
I think, Gilda, you had something that you wanted to say.
Judy
No, go ahead.
I'm
go ahead.
sorry.
Do you want to add on to that first?
Well, another piece of it is getting these young students out into corporate and startup environments so that they can have a little bit of swagger. You got to get them in there in a supportive environment so that they, especially at a place like CUNY, they don't have the pedigree.
Did you say supportive environments?
Yes.
Are startups have supportive environments?
Well, so, I mean, we are trying to curate supportive environments. but I will tell you, this is, if any of you have read the book by CMU, I think it's called Kicking Ass in Computer Science or something like that. And I read, is that what?
Yeah, is that Russell?
And they talked about how they bent the curve and improved their gender diversity at CMU. And when I got all said and done, and it's a great book and they did great things, but what occurred to me is that the conclusion was that if you can get more girls in computer science, you'll get more girls in computer science. And that's the truth. They did a whole bunch of things, including changing the criteria that they used to accept students, not lowering it, just changing it to different skills that we all know are important, like being able to work on a team. And they did a whole bunch of the other things that we've been talking about. And what happened is, I mean, it's sort of self-evident. The more girls there were in the classes, the culture in the classes started to change. And the more the culture in the classes started to change, the more women that were willing to come in. And you get this sort of virtual cycle. Similarly, we're trying to that's why I said we're curating these experiences. I just want to tell you one little story. So, especially as underclassmen for first-generation students, they can't afford to take non-paid internships, which is what freshman and sophomore students often take. So they're already behind the 8 ball in terms of not having the resume credit. So we created this experience as a pilot. We called it a WiTNY. It was a 2-week experience. And they brought in a few freshmen and sophomore girls, and they created a curated experience. They worked on a project together, they pitched it at the end, and the end result of it was that the students got used to being in the corporate environment, they got a little swagger, they had done something, and the environment got used to these non-traditional students. The end result was they all got asked to come in for summer interviews, they all got offered full-fledged summer internships, they're all gonna be working there. And I know that because they have that on their resume and they can talk about the projects that they work on, that next summer they're going to have a huge leg up. So that getting them into the environment and giving them some swagger and the ability to tell their story in the tech world is incredibly important.
So in the context of strategies, I wanted to just quickly share a personal anecdote that reinforces points that have been made earlier by the panelists. I did my bachelor's degree in chemistry at Xavier University of Louisiana, which is a Black Catholic institution, a historically Black college. And I did my graduate work at Rice University in Houston. And when I was admitted to Rice, I was the first African-American who had ever been admitted to the graduate program in chemical engineering. And when I started my career at Northeastern University in Boston as an assistant professor, I was the first African-American and first African-American female who had been hired into chemical engineering. So in the course of that, trying to navigate my own career path, what I did was I turned to the social sciences, and I would read articles in the literature about social dynamics or organizational dynamics, and what I was looking for was strategies that I could use as a one and only in navigating the landscape, navigating the climate, and dealing with the majority males that I had to deal with in my career. And what I found was that understanding the behaviors and what was driving the behaviors was actually helpful to me as I was trying to navigate. What I found was that it's not just me, like these things that I was experiencing were not unique to me. Many women,
many minorities, many minority women had experienced these same things in the past. So what I did was like, well, let's do something broader. I applied to the National Science Foundation. There's a program called Advance, and Advance was related to advancing the careers of women in STEM. So I applied, at the time they had a leadership program, so I applied for this grant. This was the gist of my grant was, and I called it this Cross-Disciplinary Initiative for Minority Women Faculty. And the idea was, how do we combine social sciences with the experience in engineering to come up with ways to empower women so that we could empower ourselves, so that we could better understand the dynamics, the impediments, and then what do you do about the impediments as a community? And so we had a cohort of women who we would come together to do things around building community networking, but we also had a research component. And the research component was to study and better understand the factors that were influencing career progression for women. And what I found was that, and the reason why I'm sharing this as a strategy, that there was so much power in the collective voices, in sharing the experiences that so many women had in common, and then coming together to say, okay, what are we going to do about this? And how are we going to hold institutions and organizations accountable? So that type of activity, I think, is really important. And I'm all for everything we can do as a means of empowering our own community and having our voices heard and having our stories told by us in a way that they're not co-opted and that the solutions make sense to our community.
So the fact that we're all in this room, we all already believe that this matters, right? We believe that diversity in tech matters, but what would you say is the best argument to be made for why it does matter to people who aren't in this room? Is it that our tech products will be better if we have sort of a more diverse group around the table designing iPhones or whatever? Is it that our communities will be better and will be enhanced if we have a more diverse body of people thinking about technical solutions to community problems? Or is it that I was surprised when I was reporting my Silicon Valley piece that like these are really good like six-figure jobs that people can get out of college. Like there's just the human rights argument that this is a great field where there actually is quite a bit of work-life balance, where you can make a very good salary and use your skills. So when you're trying to persuade the world or the big tech companies that this really does matter, that it's not like just a sort of a niche problem to worry about sometimes, or to have some summer internships where you bring girls on campus, what is the best argument, do you think?
So I think there are four arguments, and it depends who you're arguing with. So the first two are when you're arguing with corporate CEOs.
Right.
And we know what they are. Diverse teams produce better results.
Right.
So we know that one. Two, you can't solve the workforce problem if you leave half of the available population sitting on the sidelines. You just can't. There aren't enough people, so we won't. If you want to be able to fill your jobs, you got to get some women in the game. So those are the sort of two corporate arguments. The sort of social good argument is it's an economic fairness issue, because that's where the money is. That's where the opportunity is, and you can't leave women and other underrepresented groups sitting on the sidelines of all of that economic opportunity. But the one that I prefer is more philosophical, sort of a species argument, and that is, if any of you have read Ray Kurzweil, he's a futurist. If you don't know him, go read him. And he talks about the fact that to reduce many volumes of his thinking to a sentence, technology is the evolution of human biology. If you think about human biology, we haven't changed very much in the last few millennia, except that we are producing technology that is rapidly changing everything, not only about all of how we work and live, but our environment, as well as our bodies as the technology moves back into. And we already know we're there. You have pacemakers, you all know that. So imagine, if you will, that as we go through the next 50, 100, hundreds of years, the technology that is going to essentially determine the future of the species, and I really believe this, is designed and led by a single gender. I don't care if it was all you.
Right.
That's scary.
Yeah. Are you all laughing because you disagree?
We like it.
No, we like it. We like it.
You know?
Yeah.
Survival of the species.
Yeah, yeah.
That's my argument.
Right, right. And who does that argument work best with?
You know, other futurists and
Right. It's true. While you're reading Kurzweil, read Neil Stephenson's Seven Eves, which is a fictional narrative based on exactly the same.
yeah. I mean,
the
a
same thing.
slightly more tractable thing is, and you all read about algorithmic bias. You know,
Yeah,
so we're
exactly.
all busy
Yeah.
developing algorithms. You've read this stuff.
Right.
That because the people developing them are of a primarily single gender, you get real bias built into algorithms that are now making decisions about anything and everything, and that's scary. That's a little more tractable than the future of our biological beings.
And I think it matters to the corporate environments because companies don't want to be accused
Right.
of algorithmic bias.
Right.
Yeah, it seems to be a very touchy issue, actually. Yeah. What were you going to think?
I was just thinking about this economic issue. I spent most of the weekend reading about 150 applications for scholarships to something called the Women's Forum in New York. And these were all women who were returning for education. And it was one more gut-wrenching, heart-wrenching story after another of illness and of obstacles and of addiction. I mean, they were incredible. One of the fields they had to fill out was what degree they were going for, and another field they had to fill out was what their employment aspiration was. And again and again and again and again, it was social worker. Now, I am not in any way dissing the importance of social work as a social good. I am not. But as I read application after application after application, I thought to myself, there are some women in this group who would be so well served by somebody saying to them, you know what, with all due respect to finishing your BA and getting your master's of social work, there is another whole thing you should think about as a social good, as a way to address society's grand challenges, but to do it through technology and to do it in a way that will support your family in a way that you will not by being and I feel awful even saying this, and I can imagine tweets out there saying
my daughter's getting her degree in
exactly
social work.
It's clear that you're not dissing social work.
I'm not dissing social work. I'm just saying that I would like women to think about the broad horizons of professional success as they think about what their needs are for their families going forward, and for us to not gender stereotype that the women should all move into the healing arts and that those are going to be the best ones for them. Some of the most exciting healing arts are actually, to Judy's point, going to be through technology.
That's really interesting because when you look at other fields where women have made inroads and tend to stay and continue their careers, medicine is one of those. I mean, women who get their MD tend to become doctors and they tend to stay doctors. And part of the reason is that medicine has changed in some ways to have more work-life balance. You're more likely, if you're a pediatrician or an internist, whatever, to be part of a medical group. So maybe if you need to, you could work 4 days a week sometimes. And so there's some structural changes in medicine that have made it a little more, I think, conducive to women working. But it also, I think, has to do with the commitment to the community and to feel like you are, participating in the healing arts and helping people. And so do you feel that maybe there just isn't the sense that tech has this, because we're so fixated on our iPhones or whatever, that there's not as much of an awareness that it is really impactful on communities to have these skills and
Little tech rebranding there.
Yeah, rebranding, yeah.
Well, I think that, when you think about studying biology versus becoming a doctor, we haven't quite made the connection between studying computer science and then working on something that helps lives or helps communities, or it's sort of computer science for the sake of computer science. And I think that is the link that's missing. It gets back to your point. You can be very interested in the problems that social workers address and choose to major in computer science so that you can address them. And we haven't done a good enough job, I don't think, making that connection.
I heard about a high school recently that was trying to increase the participation of women in its robotics competitions, you know, the national first robotics competitions. And so they began sending out information to the high school students about the use of robotics to create prosthetic devices to help people with disabilities, and like that, they doubled the number of women who were participating in the robotics.
That's
It's
really
not
interesting, yeah.
right. I mean,
Yeah.
it seems so
Yeah.
commonsensical.
Yes.
So I do think that we could find ways
Right.
to talk about this that would make it, you know, more.
Yeah,
more
it always
prominent.
is robotics competitions.
Yeah, right,
God bless them. But,
Yeah.
and what about, you know, preparing young women for the kind of workplaces they may be entering into? I mean, the thing about the tech world is there are some now older established companies that have, you know, HR departments and procedures in place for problems in the workforce, but there are also, as we know, I mean, fortunately for my Atlantic piece, the Uber story broke, you know, right as it was coming out, so it was like suddenly even more relevant than ever. But preparing, and I don't know how you can or whether you should have to, but preparing women for the kind of startup environments that they may be going into, where there isn't an HR department, or if there is, it exists basically as kind of a trash can for complaints to go into. I don't know. I mean, I don't know how you would or could or should have to prepare young women for a real variety of work environments that in some cases aren't as mature and don't have the processes in place that bigger corporate environments do.
Well, one of the approaches I've been taking, particularly as a dean, working to make sure that our students are well prepared for whatever path they choose, is building basic skills around self-confidence, understanding who you are, what you are, being self-aware, knowing what it is you want to do. I work a lot with the students around mindsets and having the appropriate mindset around any particular activity, like having a growth mindset, having an entrepreneurial mindset, whether you ever see yourself starting a company or not, but being able to think about yourself, plan your own career, having students understand that you have to be responsible for your own path. You can't like sit back and say, oh, somebody's gonna take care of me, and they're just gonna like point the way. So that sort of self-reliance, self-efficacy, and building in a way so that if you are having an experience while you're being trained, that you can build that inner strength, you can use that inner strength, and again with the mindsets, to be successful in any environment. And at the same time, helping people understand it's not always just about the individual. We need to understand the organizational piece of it, the infrastructure, policies and practices that may impede one and, or disadvantage one and advantage another. So that if you have an understanding of that whole piece of it, you're much more likely to be able to navigate.
But I want to go back to a point that you said earlier, Gilda, in terms of the significance of having a coalition. And for us in the work that we're doing is having a coalition that's truly interdisciplinary. So I'm not just saying that because I'm a social scientist, but social science and computer science and engineers, and demonstrating to the young women that we're privileged to have contact with that they can't do it alone. And that the issues and the obstacles that they very well may encounter is not something that's a symptom of an individual, but of a system. And then also demonstrating the importance of an ecosystem. A lot of times, initiatives unknowingly treat parents like the Charlie Brown syndrome. And I published a piece on this with a colleague, is you know how in Charlie Brown, we never saw parents, we never saw adults.
You're just going to wah wah.
Yeah, wah wah, right? And a lot of times the initiatives, particularly for underrepresented communities, adapt a Charlie Brown approach. And we are arguing that it has to be a coalition that includes parents, community members as assets, not categories or individuals to fix, but communities that we need to the point that you said earlier, dialogue with, to build that coalition, to reframe the narrative. And then one last point I want to say is that I'm also mindful that patriarchy can wear a skirt. And so the idea, it's true.
It's true. It's true.
So the idea of simply putting more women or inspiring more women to be is, I'm troubled by that argument for several reasons. One, the data are pretty clear that women, girls, and particularly girls of color are oftentimes more interested in STEM and technology until they hit around 12, 13 years old. And I see that at home with my almost 12-year-old. And so if we say, let's just get more of us in this pipeline or pathway, that doesn't mean we get more just systems or more equity. So we need, yes, male allies, but we also need to change the mindset of everybody.
And we need to keep a sense of humor. That's really, really important. I spent 5 years at the National Football League. You really couldn't get any more patriarchal or male testosterone than the NFL. And I did tech at the NFL. And if I wanted to take offense, I had 10 reasons a day why I could take offense. But there's actually an advantage to being the other. And sometimes you're the other because of gender, sometimes because of race, sometimes because of your experiences. I think the otherness is actually an enormous benefit for entrepreneurs and for innovation, because you just don't see the world in the same way. So you just don't see that everybody else is watching TV for the NFL and there's this new screen coming and maybe people would be interested in watching the NFL through this new screen. So keep laughing because eventually the guys realize that you're either going to laugh at them or you're going to laugh with them, and it's a lot better if we all laugh together.
Well, that seems like an excellent note to end the panel on. Our time is concluded, and this has been a great, productive conversation. Thank you all so much, and thank you for coming.